Hi guys, and welcome to A Dog's Soul, an empath's guide to your dog's feelings. Have you ever wondered why your dog is fine for, let's say, 20 minutes of a walk, or 5 other dogs walking past you, and at minute number 21, or dog number 6, everything goes cuckoo, and your dog suddenly escalates out of the blue again? Today we're going to talk about exactly that, so stay tuned and have fun. Alright, so what this is called is trigger stacking. Maybe you've heard that before, and we are talking about our dogs being fine for a specific amount of time or for a specific number of things happening. Like if we have a dog who would chase cars, we have 7 cars going by and everything's fine, and at the 8th car the dog jumps into the leash and tries to chase that car. Or if we have a dog reactive dog, that is fine for 5 dogs passing by, and at the 6th he goes crazy. That is trigger stacking. And what it does in our dogs is something like we experience in our lives as well. Like if something goes wrong, and it's not that bad, it's just, I don't know, we want to go to work and the coffee maker doesn't work. Okay, we can deal with that. We get dressed and we see our favorite pants have a huge hole in the crotch. Okay, we can still deal with that. We get to our car and we see a flat tire. Okay, we can still deal with that, but it's getting a little annoying. We start driving and we are already late because of all the things that were happening, and we are stuck behind a truck or some kind of farm vehicle or whatever, something that goes really slow. And we are getting really annoyed, but we're keeping it together. And then suddenly a car rushes past us and squeezes in and just completely cuts us off. And we snap. We start yelling and we would love to just rip that guy's head off. Right? So this is exactly the same thing that's happening to our dogs. We are fine with things happening when it's not that bad or it's just not that much. But if it gets too much, we can't contain ourselves anymore. We just escalate. And for our dogs, it's exactly the same thing. So while our dog is fine containing himself for 5 dogs, and at the 6th, he just is at the end of his nerves and he just goes back into old behaviors and he just has to vent. And that's when we see reactivity. Or same thing with chasing cars or chasing anything. Our dogs can hold back for as long as they can, but it has limits. And that's when we see old behaviors come back. And of course we don't want that, so how do we prevent that? Well, if we see our dogs escalating always at the same point, so it's always the 6th dog, or it's always the 8th car, or whatever, the 12th person, or whatever. If it's always the same number, we can try to work with that. So we can, for example, turn back when we have met 3 dogs, because we know it will not take that much more for our dog to get uncomfortable. But what helps a lot more, in my experience, is that we teach our dogs strategies and options that make him feel like he can really deal with the situations and they are not too much in the beginning. Because if we had, for example, instead of our one coffee maker, a second coffee maker, then this would not be a trigger and it would not stack to anything. And if the hole wasn't in our favorite pants, but in some kind of sock we never use, it wouldn't bother us anyway. And if we had half an hour more time, we would not be tense while driving, and the guy cutting us off wouldn't be the fifth trigger, it would be the first trigger, and it would not bother us that much. And for our dogs, it's the same thing. So if they have learned that they can really be relaxed while they meet whatever triggered them before, it is no longer triggering, and that should be our main goal for our training. And yes, that's not that easy and it's not as quick, but it's the more sustainable solution. And sometimes when we have triggers that are not really something we can work on that well, and they add to the stress, like if our dogs are reactive to other dogs, but also scared of people, and also scared of insects, and also scared of sounds, and also scared of cars, and we walk them on a stretch where there is a lot of noise and cars and maybe a construction site and a bus station where a lot of people wait, and then a dog comes around the corner. It can be the first dog that our dog reacts to, because we have, again, trigger stacking, but not one trigger, but many. So this is more tricky, right? We have to get our dog comfortable with every single one of them to avoid trigger stacking. And that takes more time. It takes more training. And when we start this process, we have to isolate the triggers. So if we're only talking about dogs, it's not that difficult. We can just pick routes where we don't meet anybody, and when we are up for training, we can seek out other routes where we meet maybe a dog or maybe multiple dogs, or we go to an area where there is a dog park, and we can start at whatever distance we need with our dog to still be comfortable and to still have a relaxed dog. So that's not that tricky. If we, on the other hand, have multiple triggers and we live in an area where these triggers are always present, we have to get creative a lot more. And with trigger, I mean anything that the dog reacts to in some kind of way. It can be predatory behavior, it can be fear, it can be reactivity, it can be overjoy, right? If our dog wants to meet every single person and gets super excited when he meets a person, and we walk by a bus station and he has to contain himself for 25 persons he cannot get to and cannot greet, it's also trigger stacking. It's extremely frustrating. So behind every trigger stacking situation, there is a very strong emotion, either fear or frustration, something like that. So if we have multiple triggers and we live in a trigger heavy situation or area, what I like to do is I like to pick routes where we have none of it or as little as possible, and keep the walks short enough so the dog is still comfortable. That takes a lot of pressure off to begin with, and sometimes it gets us a foot in the door, and sometimes even that is not enough. Like, I have seen rescue dogs, really fearful rescue dogs, who were adopted to a city apartment. And it was just impossible. The dog was fine at some point inside. Not every dog. Some dogs can't even bear that because they are so afraid of the people or of the sounds they hear in the hallway or whatever. But some dogs are fine inside. Okay, then this is something that can be worked with. And maybe get the dog in a car and drive somewhere to start walks. But in these cases, I would introduce the idea of moving somewhere where everybody can be more comfortable, right? Because it's just for the owners also not a nice living situation if they see their newly adopted dog so uncomfortable and so fearful all the time. It's not really nice to see, and it's not easy to bear, right? And in situations where we really can't avoid all the things our dogs have issues with, we can also get a vet behaviorist on board. Because a vet behaviorist can, on one hand, see if there's medically something wrong, as much as that's possible with that dog. Not every dog can be examined that easily. But a vet behaviorist also can prescribe meds that can help in the beginning, especially in the beginning. Some dogs need them all their life. But in the beginning, very often it helps a lot. Not for every dog, of course. Like, not every training technique is for every dog. But if I don't have options to minimize the triggers my dog is just experiencing every day, I have to consider different options, like a vet behaviorist. But sometimes we are just telling ourselves it's not possible, and if we get unstuck, we find possibilities. Like, I recently talked to somebody who told me my dog is extremely fearful of bikes, but I can't avoid them completely because we live in tourist destinations where people like to ride their bikes a lot as soon as it gets warmer. But that was just the story she told herself. Because when she got in her car and drove for 5 minutes, there were no more bikes. So this is where we get stuck sometimes in our beliefs and in our stories we tell ourselves. And if we see our dogs struggling, and if we see our dogs constantly trigger stacking, sometimes we have to ask ourselves if the stories we tell ourselves are really true. Do we have to walk our dogs for 1.5 hours and meet 30 other dogs because it's just the area? Or can we shorten the walk to half an hour, do more brain games in that half-hour stretch, so we do get an hour in, but only half an hour walking, and only meet 2 dogs? So again, this is not a long-term thing, but we have to start at a point where our dog is still comfortable with all the things happening around them, right? So don't be afraid to avoid things for just the beginning, for just some time. It's not the end game or the end result that you have to avoid everything for the rest of your life. That's not what's happening. Avoiding things for just some time will give you a break. It will give you relaxation, a nice time with your dog, and you'll see your dog will relax too. So it's a win-win for everybody, really. And Also, if you have a dog who is suddenly escalating or suddenly showing reactivity again, try to watch him a bit closer and see if there aren't any signs really. Because very often, when our dogs escalate at dog number 6, we could see some tension at dog number 5 or even dog number 4 or sometimes even dog number 1. And if we see tension already in dog number 1 or dog number 3 or whatever, we know that there is not much relaxation going on for the dog in the situation. And that's where we can start training. And that's where we can just make a cut and really work on the underlying issue and work on what's really bothering the dog. And that's how we get sustainable results, right? So what I would like you to do is just keep an eye out for your dog getting tense on your walks and see if this is something that you can work on or if it's just like an insect suddenly flying by and your dog is not completely comfortable, but it's not a big deal. And I would love for you to send me a PM or an email or a YouTube comment if you're watching on YouTube and tell me what you saw on your dog. What was making him uncomfortable, or did you decide to work on it, or is it just something that happens but it's no big deal? I would love to read those. And also, if you're not listening in the car, or if you're just stumbling over the podcast on a computer or phone while not in a car, take a minute to review and rate the show. That way we can together help even more people with their dogs, and the dogs live a happy, joyful life with their human companions. Have an amazing day with your dog. Have a lot of fun training, and we'll see each other next time. Bye!